Um, I'm going to go ahead and do an introduction for Jason. We're so pleased to have you on board today, Jason. Jason Karsis is a farm management specialist with the Pro Dairy program at Cornell University. Jason has worked in extension since 1991 with his extension, teaching, and research efforts centered on financial performance, analysis, and decision-making programs for dairy farms utilizing the Cornell Dairy Farm Business Summary and Analysis Program. A major focus of his applied research efforts have been on costs of different activities on dairy farms, with a major focus on dairy replacement programs. He has conducted studies on the cost of raising heifers in 1990, 93, 2003, the year 2007, 2012, and 2019, and continues to look at the impact that the dairy replacement program has on the bottom line of dairy farming. Along with the whole farm financial analysis program, he also works in the area of farm business management education and coordinates the Cornell Dairy Executive Program and peer-to-peer discussion groups. And just want to put a note in here that Marianne Corrali spearheaded the team here with the thoughts of bringing Jason on board to give this discussion. And we are so pleased, like I said. Go ahead, Jason. The floor is yours.
Okay, we will get started. Thank you for that introduction. Excited to be on, visiting with everybody here and following Julio on the cost to raise replacements and the economics associated with the heifers on our dairy farms. So we'll get started here. And as with all our pro dairy programs, we're always talking about missions and what are we striving to do, what's our goals, those types of things. So when we think about the replacement program, the goal of our replacement program, the mission, is to raise the highest quality heifer, which will maximize profits once she enters the lactating herd. The quality heifer is one carrying no limitations that would hinder her ability to produce under the farm's management system. Profits are maximized by obtaining the highest quality heifer at the lowest possible cost. So there's a couple key things in here being cost and quality. So those both come into play. So the impact of the replacement enterprise impacts our dairies quite a few different ways. One is the cost. What are the costs to raise the heifers? We can break this down a couple different ways. What are the direct costs, the things we write checks for? What are the indirect costs? Things we aren't necessarily writing a check for each month, but we might have to pay for over time, or it's incorporated into other aspects on the farm. And we'll look at some of these in a little bit more detail. How many heifers are we actually raising? How many numbers? What impact that has? We'll look at that. And then as we saw in the mission statement, what is the quality of the animals? If the animal does not perform in the herd, then we may not ever be able to make any money regardless of the cost to raise the animal. So that quality is very, very important. So what is the cost? That's always a question that comes up. And as April indicated with the introduction, we've been looking at the cost to raise heifers now, going back almost 30 years. Just look at what is going on, what the cost to raise heifers, what are some of the factors influencing it, and how can decisions on farms impact or change those costs. So it's hard to know what the average cost is. So we have a paper out, and we'll look at some of the numbers here in a minute of what the average is, but it's hard to know. And there is a big range. Few farms here in New York or the Northeast treat their replacement enterprise as a separate business and know the actual costs of the heifers. So we have to use some tools, and the farms work with us to estimate what the cost might be for different areas of their heifer raising system, from the housing to the labor to the machinery to the feed to the herd health costs to the reproduction cost per Julio's presentation. So our last study here in 2019 And we're been writing up the data here in 2020, and we have more to work through, Lauren Augello and I. But 26 farms across Northeast worked with us to complete the study. The majority of those were in New York in the summer of 2019. So it was a snapshot. Heifers are raised over 23 months, 24 months, different time frames. We only were collecting data during the summer of 2019. So we were taking a snapshot of all the systems on the farms and then using that to build what their costs would have been based off that snapshot. So that's our estimation of the total raising costs, in this case, 22.5 months to get them into the dairy herd. The key assumption with this is the input costs that we captured in the summer of 2019 would stay the same over all 22.5 months. So we know that's not necessarily correct, but that is a key assumption that we make, and I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. So if we start looking at the cost to raise the heifers, and we have the cost per animals completing here, and this is total cost. We have the percent of the total, and then the two columns to the right is the percentile range where the farms fell, or the majority of the farms fell. And so this is however the farms were raising the heifers, and most of these farms, the heifers were all on the farm, but some of the farms were using custom service providers to raise heifers at different stages of their lives. So it's not 100% all raised on farms. So if we look at the cost, feed was the biggest expense. No surprise there. It has been every year we looked at it. And in this year, it was 46% of the total. But we do have a range, $846 to $1,300 on those feed costs. And we'll ask some more questions, look at a little more detail on that feed here in a minute. It's broken down between grown feed and purchased feeds on the farms. And in the feeds here is also milk replacer or whole milk. If their farms are feeding whole milk, it is priced as of May 2019 market price for the farm. And that's what value the whole milk had as going into the feed. So that was our biggest. If we look at the second largest expense, that's labor. Between the family, the owners, and the hired labor, it averaged $310 per heifer. 13.2%. So 232 to 420 was that range. So almost a $200 range on the labor costs. Very, very big range there. And we'll spend a little bit more on that one too. So now this is an economic analysis of the cost to raise heifers. So this is the direct costs, things we write checks for, such as the feed and the labor. But it's also the indirect costs, things we don't necessarily write a check for that we can easily put a number to, but has an expense. So if you look at actually what the third largest expense was on these farms on an economic analysis basis, it's at the very bottom of the chart, and that's the interest on daily investment. And this ties back to what Julio was talking about how soon can we get them into the herd, because until the end of the herd, they are an investment, and every day we're investing more in them. And this interest on daily investment is the charge associated with investing in the heifer versus investing our money somewhere else. So our opportunity cost. And that was $151 or 6.4% of our total. And you can see a range there, which we driven on just a range in the costs. And then in this case, as I said earlier, some of the farms were using custom services. So that actually became the fourth largest expense for these 26 farms, was expenses associated with using custom services to whatever extent they were being used. And there was a range of that. So the total cost before the value of the heifer was $2,355 with a range of $2,094 to $2,600. So we have $500 range here. And that's not 100% the minimum max range. That's just where the majority of the farms fell. And the average is $2,355. So we can put this on a per head per day basis. So that's what you see here. And we go from $1.59, about $1.60 for the feed. Labor's at 45 cents. We add them all up, it's $3.45. Again, for the economic costs to raise the heifers, with a range of $3.12 to $3.80. So a pretty big range. We look at some more descriptive statistics here for this group of 26 farms. The average calving age was 22.5 months, ranging from 21.8 to 23.3. So for the most part, these farms are doing a pretty good job getting them to enter the herd. The weight pounds, 1,340. They gained just about 1,100 on the farms. So this is where a little of the custom heifer growers are coming into play there. And you can see the range here on total weight gain that might have been occurring on the farm. Average daily rate of gains, 1.87, ranging from 1.73 to 1.99. Labor efficiency. In a couple more slides, we'll spend a few more minutes on this. But we had 36 heifers per labor hour with a range of 21.7 to 51.1 right in here. And what this number is for every labor hour, 1 hour someone's working with the heifers, on average, how many heifers were they taking care of over the time frame we were capturing the data for. So in this case, 1 hour was taking care of 36 heifers, but it ranged from 21.7 to 51.1. So a very, very large range in that efficiency. And we broke the labor down between pre-weaned and post-weaned heifers to capture when they're on liquid feeds versus on solid feeds and in generally larger groups. And we can see how the average labor efficiency changed, went from 11.4 to 56.9. And again, you can see what the range is over here on the right. So now we'll bring in the value of the heifer, $150. So that gets us to the $2,505 for the total investment in the animal. The economic cost to raise her plus the initial investment. And here's our range, $2,244 to $2,757. Another key numbers in our non-completion rate, 14.8% is what we show for these farms. And it ranged from 9.9 to 22.1. So what does this mean? So our non-completion rate is a calculation on how many heifers start the system that don't finish the system, that they either unexpectedly or regrettably died, or the farm chose to sold them as non-performers. Now, if the farm was marketing the heifers to another dairy as a replacement, we tried not to capture in this, and the farmers tried not to report that to us. So there is a certain amount of heifers that start the system that the farms are choosing to have exit or they have died. Labor costs, $50,797 was the average cost per worker equivalent. That's for one person working 2,760 hours of labor. And it ranged from 42,000 to 57,000. Number of heifers, average for 26 farms was 970. We did have a range from down around the 200 heifer range up to about 1,400. So the big two, which we've talked about already, is the feed and labor. 52 to 70% of the total cost to raise heifers for all the farms. And if we look at just the farms that provide all the labor and feed, so i.e. they're not using custom services for those things, it's 60 to 68% of the total cost. So those are two that we tend to focus on the most. And our key question is, are they being used efficiently and effectively or not? And then the second one is the quality heifer being produced? We can certainly change feed and we can change labor, but we have to be careful on what potential impact that might have on the quality of the heifer. Feed, our first question is, do we grow enough feed? Are we growing enough feed of the proper quality to feed heifers? So there's always debate on what is cow feed versus what is heifer feed. And sometimes we get nervous or we have impacts on cost and quality when we're feeding heifers feed that we cannot feed to the cows. And so we use the heifers as an outlet, but is it necessarily good feed for the heifers, or is it causing challenges with the heifers? So when we think about feed cost, our first questions are we growing enough forages of the proper quality for us to raise them? And that leads to how much do we actually have to purchase? So if we have a higher quantity of the right forages of the right quality, can we still raise a quality animal and purchase less ingredients? And how much do they cost, whether it's the purchased or the grown feeds? And then feed conversion. This is a very important number. What is the feed conversion across the farms? What is your feed conversion on your farm? How many pounds gain per pound of dry matter fed? What we like to look at. And that's where we can really change the feed costs. And then the last one is, where's the manure going? Some of our farms in the study had to travel a long way for land. And when we're feeding more heifers than we need, that's even picking up more land that's even farther away. So what's that cost of the feed coming in, and what's the cost of that manure going back to that ground? Labor is our second big cost area. Is a good job being done? So again, we start with the quality aspect. How much does the labor cost? Do they have the right tools available? And then how efficient, inefficient is the setup? The size of the barns, how much hand labor, the location, design of facilities. Free barns may cost too much. And that's a very, very key point here. When we think about labor, the facilities is a big, big driving factor associated with them. If we have barns that are too small, too far away, too inefficient, regardless of the cost of the barns, we may still be way too expensive to raise them in using that facility. And we have continued discussions, and that's where a lot of analysis takes place, is what is the cost to take care of the heifers in that facility? To decide, do we continue to use that facility? Do we need to remodel that facility? Do we use a custom service provider? We try to look at those types of things. So then those all build our labor efficiency and our effectiveness on the farms in terms of raising the heifers. And it's always a running joke here sometimes that I have a small farm, but I rent all of it out. And it'd be nice to have a few beef cows. And I could just hire the neighbor to come take care of them, the neighboring dairy farm to come take care of them when I'm not home. And the dairy farmer always says, well, okay, I'm not going to spend more time to come over and take care of your 10 beef cows than I can take care of a pen of 50 or 75 or 100 or 200 animals on his farm. So that's where that kind of labor efficiency and effectiveness comes into play. So when we think about the costs, we can certainly come up with cost, estimate cost, but then what's the relationship with the replacement enterprise with the dairy? Is it just the cost to raise a dairy replacement, or is it some more things? So now we can talk about growth versus milk, some of the things that Julio is referencing and other research that has occurred over time. What kind of calving problems do we have? Are they too heavy, fat? Are they too light frame? What's the general condition of the animals when they enter the herd, such as mastitis, feet and legs, injury? What prior treatments had they had in terms of such as pneumonia treatments? And how may that impact their performance in the herd? So now let's start trying to look at a heifer management snapshot, trying to look at what the quality of the heifer may be that enters the herd. And there can be different measures, different metrics. These are ones that have been developed over time to try to say, okay, what are some of our quality metrics on our farm for our heifers? To start trying to get a snapshot of what quality may be. And it's very interesting what farms find on some of these different measures when they start looking at that, and then how they can potentially change those. So one very interesting one right here is this first calf calls less than 60 days in milk. How many of your first lactation animals do we lose in 60 days in milk or less? When we think about losing the most money associated with a heifer enterprise, it is culling that animal in the first 60 days because she is not in the herd for any length of time to start rebuilding or paying back her investment. And we want to be less than 5%. And we have found farms, as we have had some challenges, that have been well north of 10%, 15% of their first lactation animals being culled in the first 60 days. And again, that's not being marketed for dairy purposes to another dairy farm. That is, they're either dying or they're going to the beef market. So those are, what are the quality snapshot? How can you start measuring things on your farm? Our third area is how many heifers are we actually raising? So we have the cost, we have the quality. Now we have the number of heifers being raised. How many are being raised? How many are needed to maintain herd size? And how do those two numbers compare? Also need to ask how many need to be raised to offset the heifer cull rate, that non-completion rate. If I have 14%, 15% that I'm choosing to not complete the system, then I need to start more in the beginning so I have enough coming out the other end to maintain herd size. If I have more heifers, I have to commit more resources to raise them: barns, feed, labor. If I have less heifers, that's less resources. And then in my current system, how many can be raised? Some of the data we're trying to look at some more is overcrowding. What is the impact of overcrowding on heifers? How may that impact some of the costs? How may that impact quality? Those types of questions. So that's another question we like to ask, is how many can we actually raise on our farm versus how many do we need to maintain herd size? How many are we actually raising? Different ways we ask the question. Because what impact does that have on cost? What impact does that have on quality? So if I think about heifers and we look at numbers on our farms, if I take two 200 cow dairies, one has 130 total heifers in the system of all ages, from newborns up to springing on the maternity pack. The second farm has 180 total heifers in the system, 50% more, or 50 animals more. And if they've been doing this for a period of time, who has less barns and equipment and bunks, etc.? Who has less resources associated with raising the replacements on their dairy? And then what are the implications of that in terms of selling excess animals or being able to grow if they ever want to grow? Those types of questions. So when we think about number of heifers, a key one is the age of first calving. Number of heifers needed, the production life, the investment level, all those things start coming into play. But I have this chart here where we can look at how many heifers do we need to maintain herd size. And in this case, I have 1,000 cow herd in here. And we can just move decimals one spot if we want to make it a 100 cow herd. I have an 8% non-completion rate. Calving age here is 21 months to 28 months. And cow replacement rate, i.e. the cull rate in the dairy herd, 21% to 45%. So if I just look at, say, all right, I'm going to calve them in at 23 months old. So I'll look at this third line down. As my cull rate changes over time, or if I pick different numbers, how many heifers do I need to raise to maintain herd size? So if I go from 21% cull rate to 45, I more than double the number of heifers I need to maintain herd size. That's a doubling of the resources that I have to associate with doing that. So across the whole farm, that's a lot more resources needed to maintain herd size. Versus a middle of the road, cull rates 33 to 36. We can see how many heifers we need. Somewhere 68 to 75%. Oh, sorry, too far down, 66 to 72% heifers to cows, if we want to think about it in that ratio. So we can just see how much the numbers can change based on calving age versus the cull rate. So what's the economic impact of the program on the dairy farm if we try to tie all four of these areas together? How does it impact the performance of the dairy? So we're going to treat it as a separate business in our model, in our analysis. We're going to sell the heifers from the dairy do the replacement enterprise, and sell them back to the dairy. And then we can project how changes that we make may impact the overall performance of the replacement program, the overall performance of the dairy. So here's just an input screen of the model. We can put in whatever numbers you want, because these are all base things that we're putting in. So we can say 36% call rate. We're going to buy the heifers for $1,800. We're going to sell them for $150. Our cash cost to raise the heifers is $2.20 per head per day. So that's different than economic costs. We're currently calving at 26 months. We got $700 of dedicated heifer investment, barns, machinery, those types of things. 6.9% call rate. And again, we can change these whatever we like. And then my goals. I think I can lower my costs. I can lower my calving age. I can change my call rate. I can sell excess heifers if I raise excess. If I do a better quality job raising the heifer, I can get a premium. And then what if the dairy goes to 30% call rate? So again, we can project lots of different things. And there's lots of numbers on this table here, trying to summarize all those things, but I'll skip that and just go to this graph, because this is what we like to look at. And we don't necessarily have to worry about the absolute numbers, because I can go back in and change some of the underlying assumptions to change the absolute numbers as to how does the chart change as we make changes. So this first set here, these first 6 are based on doing individual things. So this first one was the base. If I can lower just the cost per day, I do a better job. Okay, we show some improvement, and you can see how much improvement right there. If I can decrease the calving age from 26 months to 22 months, that has a lot more improvement. We're raising less animals. We have less resources committed. What if the dairy culling rate changes? Really no impact to the replacement enterprise. It will have an impact on the dairy when we look at that next. What if I can lower the non-completion rate or the cull rates? 2 different things, but they are related. The heifer is leaving the herd. Okay, we can again see the improvement, and all these are from the base year. What if I pay a premium because I have a quality animal? Again, we can see what improvement. So when we think about all these things, here's the calving age. In this particular assumption's a big improvement, followed by the premium paid, followed by the call rates, eventually followed by the cost. So now what if we do all of them together? This first column here is, okay, I make all these changes and I only have enough facilities to raise that number of heifers, no extra facilities to pay for. That's when I have a positive on the rate of return, a big change. What if I still have to pay for everything that I was paying for before, even though I'm raising less heifers? So that's why we come down there, but we still have a positive improvement. And then what if I still keep my facilities full, I raise the extra heifers and I sell them? Given the fact that I was selling them for only $1,500 at the time, potentially shows a small decrease there. But again, we can change assumptions and change where some of these come here. But the important part is saying, okay, how does things change? Now, if we look at the dairy farm, the overall dairy business, our base year was right around here, 4.5% rate of return. And we can see, all right, if we make individual changes, which ones bring our rate up the most? Now, all of a sudden, you can see the culling rate of the dairy herd. If I can lower the culling rate of the dairy herd, with a bunch of assumptions in there, obviously, but we can potentially lead to an increased rate of return just because we need less heifers to maintain herd size. And then these last 3, again, if we're doing everything, we do well across all aspects of the heifers with those changes, where those improvements can be. So again, don't worry about the absolute numbers, and every farm might have some different assumptions, but this is just a kind of a visual example of how changes can potentially impact quality or the returns on the farm. So over time, there's been lots of studies done on the cost to raise heifers, and we can certainly see the trend that shows up, as with every other cost things on our farms, as our costs are going up over time. So I always like to include this just for interest for everybody. So if I summarize a little bit here and then open up for any questions, quality heifers should be the first focus. Because if we do not have a quality heifer that performs in our herd under our management system, then we can never raise them cheap enough. We need to look at all costs to raise the heifers. We certainly have the big two, feed and labor, but we have all the rest of them too that when you add them all together is a significant portion of the total cost. The impact on the dairy is more than just the cost to raise the heifer. So there's the quality, the number of them being raised, also coming into play. So there are resources on the ProDairy website. You can certainly download the full cost study. You can find the heifer quality snapshot. You can find some different Excel spreadsheets for looking at the labor and feed, seeing those were the two big costs. With that, April, I think I'm pretty close to being on time. See what questions there may be.